Hi there, and welcome back to another English lesson on TV. We are your hosts. I'm Mr. Daryl.
And I'm Miss Samantha. And today we will be discussing The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain.
And it is specifically for grades 7, 8, and 9.
Let's begin. First, on our agenda for today, we will review vocabulary words you need to know for our lesson and for the book.
After that, we will have a look at the author, and understanding where he comes from can help us understand the book better.
Absolutely. Then we'll get into the book's story, what happens in the summary.
We should look at some characters after that. They are the parts of the story that move the story ahead.
Then we'll look at the setting, otherwise known as the when and where.
And from there, we will look at some main themes, which kind of answer the questions of why and what.
And finally, we will conclude by reviewing what we learned and going over a little homework.
A little homework doesn't sound too bad.
No, never hurt anybody. So our first vocabulary word for today you will find in the title of our book. It is pauper, and a pauper is a very poor person.
Our next word is royal, and it is also connected to the book title, but in a slightly different way. So a royal is a person that rules a kingdom. It could be a king or a queen, but their children are princes and princesses. So
Yes, the prince in our title. Next up, we have identity. Identity is the characteristics that make a person who he or she is.
And one of the characteristics of someone's identity is their appearance. So that's our next word, appearance. And it is the way someone looks or seems to look.
Yes. Now we have to switch. To switch means to change positions or to change places. This will be a huge plot point for our story today.
Indeed. Our next word is the verb to judge, and it is to form an opinion about someone or something.
Now we have inequality, and an inequality is a difference in quality or amount. It's when things are not equal.
Again, we end on a good word, mercy. Mercy is when you show kindness, compassion, and when you forgive other people.
Yes, that is a great word. That brings us to talking about the author. Daryl, why? Why must we talk about the author?
Well, I think it's important to talk about the author, Samantha, because understanding where the author comes from, understanding his background.
Or her background.
Or her background, indeed. I mustn't forget the great authors throughout history. His or her background, and will give us a better picture of the book.
Absolutely, very well said. So let's get into our specific author of the day, Mark Twain.
Mark Twain, he is one of the great American authors, one of the greatest actually. He's got a lot of books with classic characters, Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn. It might surprise you to know, Samantha, Mark Twain is not his real name. It's a pen name, what we call a writer's name. Sometimes writers take a fake name to write a book. His real name was Samuel L. Clemens, and he was born in the 19th century, early part of it, and he died in the 20th century. So he lived a long time. But there's another thing that's of very big importance, I think, to you in particular. It's the region he comes from.
Yes! Mark Twain is from the southern part of the USA, which is also where I am from. We are very proud of that fact. And what we love also is that Mark Twain was really heavily influenced by his environment, by the southern US. I am very happy to say that things have changed a lot in the South compared to now compared to Mark Twain's time, because during his time there were a lot of inequalities. there was injustice, there was cruelty, and there was slavery, there were differences in wealth. So he was really influenced by this. But he wanted to say that, you know, even with all of these inequalities, we should treat people, no matter their background or their appearance, their identity, we should treat them and show them mercy. We should show them kindness. And I think that's beautiful.
I think we're lucky to have come so far from that time to our modern time.
I absolutely agree. Well, let's get into the actual story of The Prince and the Pauper now with our summary.
Okay, well, here is the summary of the book. The Prince and the Pauper, it's a classic story about two boys who have very different lives and who one day manage to switch identities.
Yes. One day, when the two boys, the pauper and the prince, of course, accidentally meet near the royal castle, they realize that they have very similar appearances. They look a lot alike. They talk, they become friends, and they are fascinated by the other boy's life and his experiences. So they make a plan to switch identities for a short amount of time, just to see how the other boy lives.
They both face difficulties after that. They learn a lot about how people from different parts of society live. In the end, after a lot of excitement along the way, the boys switch back to their original places, with the prince becoming the king, of course, and the pauper becoming that king's advisor.
Yes, it's a great happy ending, which we love. And we'll explore the characters a bit more now.
Characters, yes, it's a good thing to have a look at characters because they are the moving points of the story. They get us from point A to point B. And there can be minor characters, there can be major characters, there can be protagonists, the main characters, or there can be antagonists, the villains or the bad guys of the story. Now this story is kind of unique in that it has two main characters.
Yes, our two protagonists. First, let's start with Tom Canty. Now, Tom Canty is a pauper living in London, England. His life is very difficult because his father is a cruel man and they're very poor. Unfortunately, during this time, poor people were not treated well at all in London. But Tom, he really wants a better life for himself. Luckily, he is clever with a good heart, so he has good ideas and he always does the right thing, which helps him have a good life in the end. He lives to an old age working in the castle as a helper to the king.
Our second main character is the prince, and his name is Edward. He is, of course, King Henry VIII's son. And his life seems much easier than Tom's because he's got everything he ever wants. He lives in a castle. He is rich beyond compare. But he's always had a desire to live a normal life. And so that's what motivates him to switch places with Tom, to find out how normal kids live in England at the time. But when he does that, he learns how cruel and how unjust the society is. And this is when he decides to come back as a king and try and show mercy to all.
Yes, that is great. Now that we know the who, let's look at the setting.
Yes, and what is setting all about, Samantha?
Well, setting is the time and place, or when and where, that the story takes place. So let's look at our setting of The Prince and the Pauper.
Now, this is slightly interesting, and it brings up a genre that is also very interesting. Mark Twain, who lived in the 19th century, as you remember me mentioning before, is writing a story that's in the 16th century, in the year 1547. So quite a long time before his own time.
Yes.
Now, the question comes up, why write a story about a time that's not your own? And I think the idea of writing such historical fiction, as it's known, historical fiction is the genre, is to make the past speak to the present and try and change the present by looking at the past.
Wow, that is a great genre then. It can accomplish a lot. And much like the when, the where is something Mark Twain wasn't personally familiar with. He did not grow up in London, England, as we know, but he did a lot of research to make sure that he wrote his book as accurately as possible to really reflect London, England at the time.
Keep in mind that this is the rule of King Henry VIII, a real king, a real historical king. And he was a cruel king, and there were a lot of inequalities in society at that time.
Yes. It's also important to remember that even though the time, the place, and even some of the characters are real, that this story is not. It is fiction. It didn't really happen. But let's now focus on some main themes.
Oh, that's an interesting topic. You'll have to explain that a bit more.
I would love to explain that a bit more. Now, the main theme of a story is what the author is trying to communicate through the characters and events. In other words, the main theme of a book is the main idea of that book. And Daryl, would you mind telling us a little bit about the main theme of this book?
I would. As we've discussed before, I think one of the main themes is that of appearance versus reality. So the way something looks as opposed to what it really is. And this is important because we often judge people by the way they look, not understanding who they might be inside. And this book brings that theme out really well, I think. If you met the prince on the street, and if you didn't know who he was, you wouldn't treat him well.
That's true, which brings us to our next main theme of this book, which is mercy, showing mercy to others. Because you're right, sometimes it's easy to judge people by their appearances, but this book tells us we shouldn't do that. And no matter a person's appearance, no matter their identity, we really ought to treat them kindly, to treat them with compassion and show them that mercy that we all deserve, no matter our backgrounds.
Indeed.
But it looks like we're almost out of time, so let's review what we've learned today. First, we started by talking about the author and his life. Then we moved on to the summary about how these two boys from very different backgrounds switch identities. Next, we explored those characters more, the prince and the pauper. We looked at the setting of London, England in the 16th century. And finally, we talked about the very important themes of appearances versus reality and showing mercy to all.
This would be a good place to go over the vocabulary. We had a bunch of words in the beginning, and I think I should recall them right now. They are pauper, royal, identity, appearance, to switch, to judge, inequality, and mercy.
Yes, that word keeps coming back up as our main theme and in our vocabulary.
It's a great word.
It is. Now, as promised, we will get to the homework.
Homework. Samantha, I think you would agree with me that all of the submittals of essays and assignments and projects from kids all over Georgia has been fun to read. And I think this is a way for them to participate in the discussion that we have between ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. We love hearing from you guys. All of your ideas on Robinson Crusoe were fantastic, and I know Daryl and I even got to learn something from all of you. So please continue to write us, because it is it's a lesson, and we have to have that back and forth.
Well said. On that note, today's question is it good or bad to judge others by their appearance, and why?
Now, we know Mark Twain's answer to this, but we would love to hear what you think about it. So again, please submit those homework pieces to us to englishbookeducation.co.uk/homework. We'll be sure to read them. Thank you all so much for joining us on today's lesson on Mark Twain's The Prince and the Pauper. We'll see you all next week.
And have a great week.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.